PureHeartRanch by Clara L. Mills, aka K, aka Rebel K, aka Wyland Rebel K. Written 1/29/2018. 9 chapters. Mystery. Right and wrong. Loyalty, love, comedy, animated forest. PureHeartRanch. The beginning. Chapter 1. Kay Dean and Fraser had been together for 16 years. And they over pretty close for quite a few years of being together, and had a 14-year-old daughter. He'd lost his mom due to an aneurysm in her brain, and a few years later, she'd lost her mom due to Alzheimer's, and coped as they lived in Fraser's double wide. He was a car audio technician and installer, and she was a landscape and beauty photographer, and she'd put the majority of her earnings into her banking and used the rest to contribute with bills and household needs. But as time grew, things started to unravel, as she'd soon see changes she'd not think she'd seen, at least for a good deal of time. But she'd just try harder and focus more on things, as she thought it would be okay. Kay Dean was a huge-hearted, motivated, and driven woman whom felt gifted is not an option for her, as she felt she'd always been a fighter, never a quitter, and that's the way she wanted to keep it. She was comfortable with how she felt and how she seen things. Little did she know, there were a few people who knew more than they may lead on to. A few with same special talents as did she, yet unaware of them. They knew what she was thinking, how she was feeling, knew how she seen and viewed life, and in what she seen in her mind, and much more. But they made sure she didn't find out, at least until she seriously needed to know, and one that know probably more about her than she may even know about herself. Her friend, well, best friend. His name was Dwight. Okay. She'd always liked to have a bottle of red wine and a glass to relax her when she worked, as it helped her relax and be one with her camera. They took a night for movie night. She picked out a really good horror movie and made a huge bowl of popcorn, but things didn't really go as planned. Due to Fraser had said he'd already seen it and had work to do anyways, ordering equipment for some customers at his shop, so she sighed, turned off the TV, and poured a glass of wine, picked up her camera, as it was only about 6, so she went outside to take some photos. She was so outgoing and spontaneous, spunky, kind of kid-like energy, and a huge country tomboy. She had a huge array of creativity, and he was outgoing yet a bit too serious, intense all the time. But when she got with him, she took on the relationship with all the goods, the bads, and the uglies. Always very understanding and patient. She never really ever communicates with very many, as she'd usually just stay to herself, minding her own business, and it made for a very peaceful life for her, yet a part of her was somewhat grounding in bored and lack of human contact. When Fraser would come home, he'd sit next to her and talk about the cars he'd been doing and the people who would bring them in and the stories that he had to tell. They would talk, laugh, have a good time. Then after a bit, he'd go shower and turn in for bed, as she'd follow about a half hour later. They had a pretty good thing going, and for the most part, she was happy with everything, and when she'd have thoughts of them too, she'd smile. Page 3. Bonfire barbecue. It was Friday, and Fraser had suggested that they had a nice bonfire barbecue with some friends, and he'd said he'd open the door and place his surround sound stereo, which held always play rock, country, sometimes hip-hop, which was fine. So they did. He made burgers, hot dogs on the grill. They had big coolers, 4 of them, Bud Light bottles, and had big bottle Jack, Crown, Shine, and a few 2 liters of Coke for mixing. The stereo was playing loudly, echoing out the front door as the bass was trampling through the ground. It traveled. People were standing around, laughing, talking, drinking. Fraser was over across the way, hanging, doing the same with his stereo buddies. People were even dancing, acting awkward and weird and dumb. Mostly girls and teens, and Kay Dean sat in front of the huge pit with cigarettes, alcohol, and her J's, listening to the music, lip-syncing along, and just checking out and watching everybody have a good time. Madeline, now 15, was hanging out with her boyfriend Dawson, and her friends laughing and carrying on, dancing, acting silly, goofy. Kay Dean laughed and smiled. Her dad would smile, shake his head. Then as Kay Dean braced herself as Dawson and Madeline walked over to talk to her, and she was hyper and energetic, laughing and joking around as one of her friends told Kay Dean she looks really young as she said thanks. Madeline laughed and said she needs to get her eyes checked. That's her mom, and she was old. Her boyfriend just looked at her as she said, "What?" Page 4. She is. And then she laughed hysterically. He shook his head and told her that wasn't cool, as Madeline just said whatever and laughed as she said, "Come on, guys," and they walked away to go chill. She'd get up and walk over to where Fraser was with his stereo buds and stood there with her beer bottle, listening to them laugh, talk, and BS. Talking about stereo equipment, guy stuff, as she just stood there and drank. Fraser said and asked where Madeline was as he looked over and said, "Oh, okay." "What are you doing?" she replied with nothing, "just wandering around." He replied with, "Oh, that sounds like fun. Ha ha ha." She says, "Yeah, okay, right." And she smirked. He asked her when she wasn't over talking to her girlfriends, as she just remained unresponsive when he went back. He went back over and sat in front of the fire pit, but beforehand she thought in her mind, yeah, You'd like that, wouldn't you? Gee, sorry I was bothering you. She went to turn around to walk back over to the pit. His girlfriend, his best friend, Dwight, was swinging his brew as he coughed and spit out as she looked back and said, "Okay, then," and laughed, then walked away. Fraser asked him if he was okay as he laughed, and Dwight smiled and said, "Yeah, I'm good." Stared into the flames with her tank and a Rebel baseball cap over her long elbow-length brown hair. She had makeup on and she was done up. Page 5. Hazel green eyes, mascara all decked out. Just sitting there enjoying the music and the warm fire, listening to the crackling. The whole night she sat there staring deeply into the flames, drinking, and all she could think about was watching the flames dance and hearing the crackling of the embers, with not another single thought in her mind other than the fire. She felt like she looked into the fire, all of her fears and worries and so on would just dissipate, and she would feel the peace within herself, as that thought would constantly linger through her mind all night. She was not yet a full adult. She was only 19. As she looked up at Madeline and her friends, Dawson would look at her as he'd put his head down, looking down at the ground, then back up at Madison. The girls were talking. Of course, she didn't think nothing of anything as she just kept to herself, listening to the music playing. Everyone gathered around the fire in chairs, talking, drinking, laughing, acting dumb. Maddie, her girls across the way, Dwight, and the gang. Kadeen always kept her head down or staring off into the fire, watching the flames dance, as Maddie looked over and says, "Ha ha ha, who wears a hat at night? So dumb." And her dad says she has a She has a point. Why don't you take off? As she replied, nah, I'm good. As Dwight laughed and she blew her cigarette smoke into the flames. Page 6. Frasier. Last hysterical. He does stuff like that all the time, wearing makeup, and she knows I don't pay attention to stuff like that, but that's what she likes. Madeline. Oh, burn. Laughing hysterical. Dwight. Wow, that's some heavy shit. Y'all are wrong, dang. Frasier. Last hysterical. What? Kadeen walks up and went inside as she sat on the couch and just sat there empty-minded. Then after a few minutes she went to bed. An hour later, then Frasier came in and they all went to sleep. A couple months later, ever since that night, she couldn't shake the things that had been said, as she didn't show it, but it really affected her in a big way. She never expressed it. She just kept it all to herself, as she was a very personal person. In some way, that night changed, and as she grew as a person, things started to grow distant. But still, tried not to lose sense of who she was as a person. At the same time, due to she wanted to just forget about everything if it's negative and just go on about her day and her life. Page 7. And in her mind, she felt like a part of her was starting to drift off or fade, and no one could see or feel how she was feeling inside, but she tried to shake it off. And before I go any further, none of my stories have anything to do with me. I do not put myself in them. Just put that out there. And ignore it, as she goes about her everyday life as it was. She cooked dinner and set the table as they all three sat down. When Frasier says, "What this? I thought you were making meatloaf." As she replies with, "Well, you could have made something, but I made a casserole. It's green bean casserole." "You didn't say anything about it." "I was looking, trying to figure out what I was going to make," and then Maddie added, "Yeah, meatloaf sounds good." So Kadeen says, "Well, I'll make meatloaf, not want meatloaf, and might want something else." At that point, she stays and just says, I'm just gonna make this. All she could think about was how her nerves were starting to get all wired up, but again, she took it and shook it off. Kadeen had went to Tabby's for a while to chat and hang out as they talked girl talk and laughed. Of course, Tabby knew that Kadeen had always confided in her with everything, as Kadeen had trust issues but not always trusted her. Tabby sensed Kadeen had stuff bugging on her mind, but hadn't before ever said anything about it. But it was due to having some much needed girl talk, serious talk, but wasn't sure if she was quite ready to fully open up to anyone. Or would she ever be? Page 8, Girl Talk. Kadeen. So what's been going on with you, Miss Thing? Haven't seen you around much lately, Tabby. Not much. Just tending to Hannah and working. I might have an event coming up. Think I'm ready to enter the BMX competition. But enough about me. What's been up with you? Ever since the barbecue, you've been off your game. I mean, are you still hooked up on all that? Talk to me. Kadeen, have you ever had a split moment where you just feel that, or like the world just stopped time and freezed, and your stomach just tingles and caught up in there and then now, but felt so vibrant and alive? Tabby, hold up. Where you going with this? Aren't you and Fraser like, the feeling that with him still, you feel like, what's going on, Kadeen? Yeah, of course. It has nothing to do with the relationship. It has to do with just spiritual stuff. I just been thinking a lot lately, and time is of the essence, and I want us to all be able to just go out and just have fun and that kind of thing. Oh, okay. So I understand that more clearly. That makes more sense. She goes, yeah, are you serious? I'm not that person. She goes, ha ha ha. Well, you're still growing and you haven't even hit the adulthood yet, woman. She goes, oh, so you're one to talk. She goes, touche. She said, my mind has just been off the charts lately. Tabby, yeah, I get that. I've never seen you set off your guard down until just recently, so I had to talk to you, but trust me, you're just going through a slight riffle right now. Just needed to clear your mind and get yourself back, grounding your feet into the ground. You'll get there, you always pull through. KD, I agree, and she thanked Tabby for just listening and being there. She went in, took a shower, and watched a little bit of TV. After another week, Kadeen had finally felt like she was back to herself again. She just needed to shake it off once again to get her groove back. She went back to doing her photography and had a few events booked at a gallery, sold a few pictures of her framework. She deposited as always and went home. Her and her family were doing good and everything seemed great as she felt relieved and confident again. Meanwhile, apparently Madeline and Dawson were not and haven't been on speaking terms for a couple of days. As he'd found out, she'd been texting Dwight, and she said they were just friends. But it was back and forth for a week, and he told her, if you were just friends, you would have told me about it. Eventually, after talking, they had worked it out, and she had convinced him that they were friends, and he had verified it, and that he was overthinking, and it wasn't what it was made out to be or looked like. Everything was good. And she said, I'm very disappointed in you for even coming up in the first place. Usually you know what they say when you want to accuse somebody, it's usually you doing it. And he said, well, I'm sure that that's not the case. As she said to him, well, I never would have expected that. Not coming from you. And he says, I guess I deserve that. Page 10. Paid medical leave. He was in there for about a week and a half. He had went to the hospital. He had paid medical leave for 3 weeks as he had a big bandage on the left calf and one wrapped around his waist across his ribs section. Everyone went in to visit in and out of the hospital as he got into an ATV accident and he had rolled it and it had landed on his ribs as he landed on his side. But the only one that didn't show was Maddie. Although when she visited his place, she spent her time hanging out with Dwight and Tabby. But did talk to him once as he was laid up in the bed. Kadeen brought him soup every day, though, and bottled water and sweet tea, checking to see if everything was good. Two months later, Kadeen had got up and went out to check the mail and brought it inside and sat it on the couch and checked out what the mail came. As she'd noticed, she got a brown vanilla envelope, and inside was the deed and papers on her mom's ranch, PureHeartRanch, when Kadeen had picked the name for it when she was 13. She was very surprised and happy as it sat on 12 acres of land and was valued around $800K and had a huge barn with 8-horse stables on one side, and on the other across the way was all the feed equipment, the sugar blocks, so on and so forth. Page 11, end of part 1. The ranch. It was a 4-bedroom with 2 full luxury bathrooms with fitted tub and shower with all the fixings. It was all cherry wood and oak. 18 feet. When she was young and just kept adding on, as the exterior was all brick and the inside was all pure wood, as the smell filled the whole inside of the house. She had a 24-foot pool, which was heated. Chapter 2. She was gonna keep the news to herself for a while, but eventually spilled the beans. Due to her excitement, she was able to hold it in for a while, but a while to her is like a whole hour. After she got the papers, Fraser and Madeline were very surprised, and he did own his double wide. He had suggested for her to sell it, as she replied, "No, that's my childhood home. I can't believe you would even say that." He'd reply with, "Well, the property is valued at $800, and you can." And she said, "I'm not even having this conversation with you." She goes, "Sometimes it's not about the money. You disappointed me with that." And she said, "I'm going to make my coffee, and I'm going to pretend we didn't even have this conversation," as he scratched his head and just went out on the porch with his coffee. "Well, whatever. We're going to move in, or you're going to just let it sit there. I mean, either way, it's fine with me, because I own my double wide and the 3 lots it sits on. She said, "Yeah, you can. I think Maddie would really love it there, and plus it's right next to Dawson's property line next door, so she will be right there." Of course, he replied, saying, "Oh, nice." And that one week they moved. It would benefit due to the whole house, and Bourne ran off. The barn ran off of solar panels for electricity, as her dad all put them on there long ago. And he was all about saving a buck wherever he possibly could. Thank you for tuning in to part 1. Tomorrow night will be part 2. Stay tuned, and I hope you enjoyed.